Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Restoring Hope with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And as always, a huge thanks to our community partners who make it possible for us to be here each week. Tesco, Prime 47 Downtown, and Shepherd Community Center. The support of these tremendous organizations makes it possible for us to be with you every Thursday night right here on WHMB TV 40. Well, tonight, we're turning our focus inwards and looking at Crosswinds Counseling. Crosswinds is in need of people to join the organization, and tonight in our first interview, I sat down with Cindy White, the new Vice President of Human Resources, earlier this week, and she shares what makes Crosswinds special and what makes a person a great candidate and fit for Crosswinds. Cindy, you are the new Vice President of Human Resources for Crosswinds Counseling. Why did you join this organization?
I joined, was it now 3 weeks? It's been a whole 3 weeks. After a long career in insurance. Now, that doesn't answer the question, though. Before I went to insurance, I was a registered nurse. I worked in the clinical setting as a registered nurse. So I said to myself when this opportunity came along, I'm coming to a point in my life where I wanted to move my career into something more meaningful. It started out in a meaningful way. My heart is caring for people. And as a nurse, I had tons of opportunity. And I did the same thing in insurance. However, when this opportunity came, it was just the right time to come back, work with an organization, and help support the mission of an organization like Crosswinds to deliver, not my background, healthcare, but mental health services. And what a best time to do it because there's such a great need right now. So it was a perfect transition for me at this time in my life.
So you've not been directly connected to mental health, but you've lived in this world, obviously, and you've seen that need go up. When you think about the state of the world right now and how badly we do need people to join the team to provide mental health care to a hurting world, what goes through your mind as you kind of put all of those pieces together, what the state of the world looks like, as well as the workforce and all of these factors coming together? It's led to this very unique time and place. From an HR perspective, how do you process all of that?
Well, I'll start from a human perspective.
Even better.
When I was working at my last employer, we quarantined at home. It's the first time in my entire career of 30 plus years of working where I worked from home, a place that I didn't think I could ever work. My husband's self-employed. He's always been independent and worked from home. And I've always looked at him and said, I don't have that kind of discipline. In those 2 years, I was able to spend more time watching what you just described, the state of the world. And it was, and how COVID and people being quarantined and watching how that was affecting mental health, not only with my coworkers, but family members, myself. In that 2 years, I personally pursued certifications in meditation and professional counseling, professional coaching with individual young ladies that I know. And in those conversations, it became apparent that the state of individuals' minds, their mental health, was really being challenged with the current conditions. So, to answer your question, from an HR perspective, it's people. It's at the end of the day, there are a ton of hurting people out there, and not ways that we were anticipating with COVID. We were looking at the physical, ramifications of an infection and affecting your body. But it was not only COVID, but it was being quarantined. It was the masking. It was the effect of all of that. Impacted individuals in ways I don't think we ever anticipated. It was totally unexpected.
Let's talk about the need. We need counselors to join Crosswinds in Indianapolis and Fort Wayne and soon other states. And in the workforce that does exist, this workforce that we've never seen before. So many of them, I don't even know what it's called anymore, the Great Resignation. I feel like it now has had 2 or 3 other names on top of that. How do we go about appealing to and finding great candidates to join Crosswinds when the work is very difficult to begin with, and then you throw on all of that stuff in the workforce?
Right. Mental health workers, counselors, social workers, and the ones that I've spoken to, the people that I've interviewed, the people I inquire and ask them what is the driving force behind why they chose this as their academic pursuit. And their answers were very much like mine as a nurse. They're very much. When I became a nurse, I wasn't promised a career that was going to make me rich. I was promised long hours, waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, being in situations that most people wouldn't want. While again, very different than mine, the motivation behind these excellent, wonderful people is the same. Their passion is for the people. The passion is to help restore individuals to a place that they can be independent. And I don't think that they initially are thinking about the conditions and how tough it's going to be. Now, the reality does hit, and what we're doing here in our effort to bring on new recruits is to be honest about all of that. So many of these young people are coming out of college with aspirations to help restore individuals in their home and children in some of the most devastating conditions possible. And then that reality hits when they're in that home and they're faced with individuals who don't even want them there. So one of the things we are doing is improving our what we are calling our Impact Institute as we bring new hires in here, educate them and expose them to truths, to what they'll face.
Speaking of truth, tell me about the faith component of Crosswinds Counseling. I suppose some people could look at that as a real asset to the organization, finding people who align with the biblical basis and the faith component to what Crosswinds Counseling believes. But some people might look at that as a hindrance. It's a barrier to hiring some people. How do you look at that faith component that Crosswinds is firmly built on?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. We never want that to be a hindrance. That is not a requirement. It is, though, the foundation of healing, from my perspective. And while not a requirement for hiring, one would hope that while working with us and the acceptance of our tenets of culture, which is heavily based in faith, it is often said that it is not the words that help people see how Christ is the foundation of life and change and healing. It is not the words, it's my living. And so while we may recruit people who aren't necessarily grounded in the Christian faith, that's fine. That's fine. It is although my personal hope that over time we would warm their hearts to consider it.
I love that. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Restoring Hope with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm Curtis Smith. Tonight we continue the focus and the spotlight on Crosswinds. Earlier this week, I sat down with Chris Thomas, who's working on recruiting for Crosswinds Counseling. Here's our conversation. Chris, you have an interesting title, Director of Strategic Initiatives, but I know your focus right now is mainly recruiting. That's a real challenge given where we are in the world right now and in the mental health space especially. How are you going about tackling getting people into Crosswinds Counseling?
Absolutely. I think just with the environment and where we are in the world, people need people. And every organization is looking and needing people right now. And so one of the biggest things that we're doing with that is really leaning into who we are and what Crosswinds Counseling is. And so I think one of the biggest things that we're doing is calling people who identify with our tenets of culture. one of the coolest things I think about us is that we are a faith-based organization, and we're leaning into that. And really what that's doing is it's polarizing. It's putting people who want to be here for what we believe and saying, man, I am excited about your mission and where you're going, that we can have impact in a space that maybe I was frowned upon talking about Christ and my faith, but we're really calling people to that, and that's been a great recruiting tool in being able to find people that want to align with us in those areas.
I love that you're not looking at it as a stumbling block or a barrier, because some people might look at it that way. But being faith-based, being a Christian organization can be something that really buoys the entire organization, obviously. You mentioned the tenets of culture, which is a document that really describes who Crosswinds is, the foundation of this organization. For those who don't know it very well or might be hearing about it for the first time, what is the tenets of culture?
Yeah. So the tenets of culture is really a framework of what we believe, and not only just what we believe, but backed up with scripture. I think the first time that I read it, I remember thinking, man, this is a doctrinal statement. And it was so cool to me because it really laid out the practical steps of who we wanted to serve, what it looked like, how we thought God wanted us to serve in those areas, and then putting scripture behind it to say this is where we're getting these things from, which has really given us a North Star to be able to say this is what we're about, who we're about, and really leaning into that.
Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of this, the logistical challenges of recruiting. How are you going about it? How are you structuring the work of finding more people, finding the right people, getting them plugged in? You're doing that in Indianapolis, in Fort Wayne, soon in Ohio. It's a lot.
Yeah.
How are you juggling the logistics, and what does that actually look like to go about finding people in today's world?
Yeah, in being specific. So a big way in how that looks is in those different markets that you talked about of where we're trying to have people. It's not just one thing to have people there, it's to have the right people there. So it's us getting specific with local churches, local colleges, the people that we currently have working for us and talking to friends and family, being specific about what our goals are in those areas, and then really from that, launching our framework of finding people. To be able to just blast something out there to hope that we get a dime in the rough, we're finding that that's not always the best in this case with Crosswinds. We want to be specific with those people. So really it's just getting down to the relationship side of things and finding the right people for the right fit with where we're going.
And how much of a challenge is that? I mean, it sounds like, for those of us who aren't in the recruiting space, it sounds like such a challenge given all the things going on over the last couple of years, coming out of a pandemic and people suffering from mental health issues themselves, and people choosing to either leave the workforce or look for jobs that only allow them to be at home. I mean, how do you get your arms wrapped around all of that?
So we can look at it and say it's problematic, which it can be, but in a lot of ways, it has been a blessing of opportunity. We are and unfortunately, there's so many people that need help, but there's also those that are looking to that call and saying, I want to help. I want to be an ear to listen. I want to be a therapist, especially after everything we've gone through. I want to be boots on the ground, listening and loving people well. And so in your question, like where we're finding those people and how we're kind of laying that out really comes back to this idea of a call. We're reaching out and talking to people and building those relationships, and they're answering a call where God has put it in their heart to say, I want to be here. This is the time for me to be here. Even with people leaving the workforce. And from the practical side of that, we as an organization are trying to find flexibility and different things that go along with that, trying to adapt to how we make it so you as an individual have a work-life balance, how you're able to have some of those benefits that are great and awesome, and trying to be an all-around, well-oiled company.
I know that's a big part of how you attract talent these days. It's not just here's the job, here's the salary. You've got to take the whole person into effect. Look at work-life balance. Look at other benefits. So thinking outside of the box, has that been eye-opening for you? How you do have to craft things specifically for people and try to meet all of their needs, not just their employment need.
Absolutely. You think about my value prompt versus yours. You think about just the range of people that we have in our organization. It is a challenge, but it has made us better because it has shown us where our weak spots are and where we need to get better. Really looking at the areas of where we can improve to say, hey, we missed it here, but we're doing great here. And so it's really been a challenge, but it's been good for us because it's allowed us to grow and to really buckle down with some of the other issues we have going on.
We always point people to crosswindscounseling.org/careers. But if someone is watching this and they think they might have a spot at Crosswinds, it might be their next career move, or they have a friend or a family member they want to point towards Crosswinds, what other resources should we be pointing out to them today?
Yeah, so we have, engagement is key. So through our different social, through online access, through the different things, when you see an interactive post, whether that's Google Ads or different things with that, interacting with that allows us to gain some of your information so that we can interact with you. If you have questions, starting with the website is a great place. If you just want to talk, call in and ask those questions, and we'd be more happy to talk to you about what that looks like in joining our team.
Wonderful. Chris, thanks so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Restoring Hope with Crosswinds Counseling. In this week's Counseling Corner segment, Katie Quigley is back with us. She's going to share some insights tonight on how she helps her Crosswinds clients.
Hello, my name is Katie Quigley. I'm one of the counselors here at Crosswinds. I really have a heart and a passion for working with people who have experienced trauma in their past. My approach to therapy, especially when working with individuals with trauma, is this idea of having one foot in the past, one foot in the present, and our eyes towards the future. And this concept is based off the ability for us to kind of sit in our past and our trauma for a minute, and where we may not cognitively understand what's happening, we know that our body holds on to it. And there's a saying that says our body keeps the score. And so as we have one foot and ability to step back into the past, we also stay firmly grounded in the present as well. And then our eyes are always focused towards the future, because this idea that there's always hope for our future. There's always an ability for redemption, an ability for restoration and for healing. One therapeutic approach that I tend to use when working with trauma is something called EMDR. EMDR works by knowing the concept that we have this emotional side of our brain and this logical side of our brain. And when we go through something traumatic, the emotional side tends to go into the forefront while our logical side tends to shut down. And what we end up doing is we end up making all our decisions based off this emotional side of our brain. So EMDR does two things. It helps desensitize that emotion, make it less distressing, and then it also connects to our kind of logical side of our brain so that we're able to look back on that event and think on it in a different way. If you feel like you are struggling with something that traumatic happened to you in the past, I think that counseling is a wonderful option for you. I've had the pleasure to sit with many, many people and help them walk through this journey, and there's so much hope and there's such an ability for healing and restoration.
Welcome back. Each week here on Restoring Hope, we focus on that last word, hope. Crosswinds chaplain Will Gross is back tonight to share some of his insights.
Hi, I'm Will Gross, a chaplain with Crosswinds. We've all experienced loss. Distance, separation, and death are a part of the human experience. Some of us have lost more than others, but at some point or another, we will all experience gut-wrenching sorrow. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought on additional, often unexpected, death and loss. Loved ones have been ripped from us before we feel that it was their time. Lives have been unnecessarily cut short. by this deadly virus. Why do I bring this up? Is it because I just want to make you feel sad? I don't. I don't intend to bring up painful memories or reopen fresh wounds or remind you of past scars. I mentioned pain and suffering to refer us to God's word. In Psalm 34, David says these words. He says, "Is anyone crying for help? God is listening, ready to rescue you. If your heart is broken, you'll find God right there. If you're kicked in the gut, he'll help you catch your breath." Isn't that refreshing to hear that God is listening, ready to rescue you? When you experience loss, please hear me say, God is near. God is near to the brokenhearted. Loss is real. Death is real. Separation is real. But so is the presence of God. And I promise you, he is with you, just like he's with me. And all we have to do is ask. If we're crying out for help, God is willing to rescue us. And that's the message of hope.
Thanks, Will, and thanks to Prime 47 Downtown, Tesco, and Shepherd Community Center for bringing us tonight to WHMB TV 40. We'll see you next Thursday night at 9:30.